Hey, house community, and welcome back to House Arrest. In these strange times, we often find ourselves holding on to things that we know. Some of those things can be soft cotton, cashmere, linens, clothing, of course. And it's so easy to make ourselves feel better in these uncertain times by putting in an Amazon order and getting, same day delivery or surfing the web and buying cheap clothes for that moment of joy. We live in this world of instant gratification. So if it's not on my doorstep by tomorrow morning, then I'll just find somewhere else that can get it to me by then. Now, the joy that we can get with buying things can be temporary, and it may just be coping mechanisms for internal dissatisfaction, but I think it's quite real in the moment because I still have some pieces of clothing that make me smile when just by looking at them. Fashion too is a mode of expression. Even in biblical times, we can see stories of people bringing gifts of golden jewelry and clothing for women. And if we take a step back, though, and open our eyes, this instant gratification lifestyle can be quite unrealistic when we really think about it. How can quality products be produced so quickly and fairly? Can they even? And I've begun to sort of question this world of fast fashion because as a mostly financially independent millennial who, although certainly falls prey to a good deal and, the desire for some retail therapy, I care and I want to care more about more than just what I'm wearing, but where it comes from and what and whom it's representing, all the while trying not to break the bank. And, if we add Corona to this conversation and we think about COVID couture, it's so much about sweats and like a nice blouse. I'm actually going to ask our guests tonight what they're wearing, what we can see, beyond the camera. But more importantly, I want to know how we do better and why this matters at all to millennials specifically. To any of our guests watching, feel free to comment your questions and we can get to them. And to begin this conversation, I've invited two guests who are immersed in the fashion industry to share their ideas and perspectives. So first, I'd like to welcome Randi Bergman to the show. Hi, Randi.
Hi.
Welcome. Thanks for being here.
Thanks for having me.
For sure. So Randi is a freelance writer and editor in Toronto. She covers a variety of topics, including fashion, art, pop culture, and lifestyle. Randi's written for The Globe and Mail, The Cut, BuzzFeed, Canadian Art, Flair Magazine, Vogue, and more. And she's worked in editing, consulting, strategy, and copywriting. Next on the show, we have Miriam Baker. Hi, Miriam. Welcome to the show.
Hi. Thanks for having me.
Thanks for being here. And Miriam is a designer with her own line, Miriam Baker, which creates clothing that exudes confidence and embodies understated elegance. As a designer with a full chest, Miriam understands the challenge that women face when it comes to finding sophisticated and well-fitting apparel. So Miriam's passion is to create clothing that amplifies the confidence of a woman and embodies this understated elegance. Welcome to the both of you. I'm really excited to have you both on this show to talk about fashion, sustainability, and really just the state of affairs today and how we can dress to make things look better. So like I said, I was talking about COVID couture. So I'm wondering, you both look great from what I can see, but what are you wearing below the line of the camera's sight?
Yoga fan.
Fair, yeah.
Yeah. Cashmere drawstring pants.
Okay, yeah, that's pretty decent. Like I'm sometimes afraid to ask that question because like what happens if it's an answer I just didn't need to know. But yeah, those are both really decent answers. So I'm glad to hear that. So to each of you, I think you come from pretty different fashion backgrounds, but if you had to answer, what does fashion represent? Be it in your personal experience or your professional experience or just, what you see on the street. What is fashion?
I can go first. For me, fashion has always been about the art form, and it's always been a wearable art form. So that's really what interested me. I've been passionate about fashion since high school, and I remember being going to chat and really not responding to the idea that fashion was status or anything to do with, a portrayal of exclusivity. And for me, it was always more interesting that it was an art form and it was just wearable. It was cool because you could really express yourself in a way that is wearable art and also can change from day to day. Like I personally, I obviously have a very specific point of view, but my style can change from time to time. And I love that. And I love that what you're feeling and the energy that you feel inside can be portrayed off of what you wear.
So it's a mode of expression, and it's more about you than it is about you and anyone else, from what I understand.
Yes. I mean, I am definitely I mean, that's sort of a challenging question because obviously there are very limited times that we are dressing purely for ourselves. Even within COVID, we are posting on social media. We are, we're not completely dressing for no one. But at the same time, yeah, I'm on the fence about that one. I do feel that it's about me, but I also obviously know that it's about other people too.
Miriam, what about you? What is fashion?
I've always viewed it as a vehicle. Fashion allows you to be anything that you want to be, even if it's just for a day. Yeah. So, you're a bride, you wear that white wedding dress, you're, the blushing virgin for a night, and that's the part you're playing that day. So, if there's a big interview, you dress professionally, and, you're putting on that hat, you're setting the expectations for the day.
So that actually leads into an interesting thought that I think ties in Randi's answer as well, which is fashion is a lot about me, but it's also about how I think you're going to perceive me, right? Like it's about this idea that wearing white means it's my wedding, and you can't wear white at my wedding because I'll see, that as and it's sort of like a two-way street. Like as much as fashion is a sense of expressing who you are and this art form, it's also dependent on the people who are watching. And Randi, I know that nostalgia is very important to you. You've created this sort of brand, Capsule 98, based on the past, and I think that fashion has a big place in that. Can you speak a little bit about your relationship with nostalgia and like where fashion fits into all of that?
Sure. I think actually I have a great answer for this. It's because I actually okay, so I just to give you a bit of background about Caps 98, I fall into the stereotypical bracket of millennials who are very nostalgic for the 90s. And I'm hugely obsessed with everything to do with the 90s. And I started Caps 98 when I found a time capsule that I'd made. My mom made me clean my closet at home. And I found this time capsule I'd made from 98 when I was 13. And it was just like incredibly detailed. And I started an Instagram account for it to share everything that was inside because I was super, super obsessed with it. And I actually feel that obviously, I mean, on the face of it, nostalgia, 90s fashion, we all know that that's like very in. But for me specifically, my relation to it is that I feel like I think a lot of people go through this phase. I feel like I went through a phase in my 20s or my early 20s when I was sort of discovering fashion and being super passionate about it. I went through this phase where I was like very serious, like very into highbrow things and really trying to educate myself on like, fashion history and all this cool, erudite stuff. And when I rediscovered the 90s, I feel like I kind of was like, oh my God, this was me all along. Why did I eschew neon and bright pink? Like that was what I liked all the time. And I think that through rediscovering the 90s, I kind of found the exact, obviously I always had a voice, but my exact voice and my exact point of view. And more specifically, I'm pretty into tackiness, and that's a big part of the 90s too. So I really, really, it kind of opened up all these places in culture for me to play and live.
I like that you just say, you're into tackiness. And I think that
I love tacky.
It just contrasted, Miriam, with like the bio that I read, which was like sophisticated elegance.
I can dress sophisticated, but my ideal aesthetic is like TMI, a stripper in the 90s in Miami. Like, that's my favorite aesthetic. Like, so, but I'm wearing like a chic sweater right now,
Yeah.
Time for everything.
Miriam, I want to even go a little bit further back in sort of material culture. I know that this history is a passion of yours, and I remember in our previous conversation that you had what to say about it. Can you talk a little bit about the concept of sort of how representation developed? So how sizes came to be normalized in a way that your brand sort of pushes back against?
Okay. Sorry. Where do you want to touch on material culture, or do you want me to talk about sizing first?
Let's talk about sizing, because I think it relates to what you're trying to do in your work.
Okay, so women's wear, it's all drafted and designed to fit a woman who is a B cup, but the average cup size today is a D everywhere except for Africa and China. So what I do is I start from a D cup size dress form, and from there I have a grade. So when I grade up, I take into account that, for example, as breasts get larger, your bust point falls, right? Boobs don't defy gravity. So you have to lower your dart for every size. And so the average woman, if she's a D, if she's an E, if she's an F, she'll find herself sausaged into off-the-rack dresses, but my garments all have built-in boob room.
So I think like it's just an interesting, I think if you're not a woman, let's say with who doesn't fit into the typical sizes, I guess, that you could find on any rack, it's like it seems like a kind of niche thing. But what you're saying is actually the average cup size is a D, right? So most women don't fit into these standard sizes. So how have you found like the reception of your work amongst women, and what impact do you think that it's making in the fashion world? We got a comment from Marissa Chef, who is saying Miriam with her arms raised.
So honestly, it's been slow. The fashion world has been slow to come around with it. I think the women who have expressed a lot of interest tend to not be fashion people. They're people who just can't find anything that fits, and they're so grateful to finally have clothes that they can zip up on their body. I find fashion has a bit of an issue with women's bodies. It doesn't seem to care about like traditionally feminine styles and fitting curves. I don't know, and especially the past decade, there's been a real emphasis on androgyny. And if you're a slim woman and you dress like a dude, it's really hot. But, if you're a woman of size and you dress like a dude, well, then you're just butch. So there's also this double standard that I don't think fashion is really addressing.
So when you say that fashion, sorry, go ahead.
I think Harry Styles wearing women's wear in fashion magazines is starting to address that issue.
Right. So when you say that fashion isn't aware of women's bodies, what do you mean? What do you mean by fashion? Like, fashion isn't an entity that decides for itself. Like maybe the two of you can speak about sort of who's behind fashion. What don't we see when we see clothing in these big retail stores?
Do you want to go ahead, Randi?
Sure. I mean, you can speak more than I can about this, but in terms of the history of fashion design, like the history of fashion design was designed by men. It wasn't designed by women. So all the biggest couturiers in history have been, I mean, not all, obviously, Coco Chanel and Schiaparelli and Madame Grey, and those people were women, obviously, but primarily the history has been men. And especially of late, all of the big designers have been men. And even recently, like there's been a lot of a push towards obviously equality across the board in general, but in the last couple of years there have been like a couple hero moments. By a couple of years I mean about 10. There's been a couple hero moments with women being in charge, like a Phoebe Philo at Celine and Stella McCartney, but by and large men are the ones in control. And like when you think of even heels, like Christian Louboutin, Manolo Blahnik, those are men. They don't have to wear those shoes. So I mean, that's
why
the
should
simple
they
answer.
care? They don't know what it feels like to have to wear an uncomfortable garment that doesn't fit, and they're looking
Yeah.
at the bottom lines. And if it's already selling, why change anything? Women are already putting up with uncomfortable clothes, so why experiment with inclusive sizing?
So Miriam, you're kind of on the front lines of this, creating clothes that defy this idea of why change anything. Randi, can you speak to that a little bit in your work or in designers that you've met? What is the atmosphere like sort of in the field of people who want to speak back to this concept?
I mean, I think there's a lot of, I think Miriam could probably speak better to this than I can, because from my perspective, I feel like, and you made a very good point, like fashion doesn't care about women's bodies. I think fashion in general, and especially like fashion in terms of media, obviously, but also in retail, it's going through like a kind of a growing pain period right now. And I think there's a lot of a disconnect between what people think people want and what people want, which is really across the board. So, and I find like I'm part of it sometimes too, because like I'm in the media industry and I'm such a specific type of person who's like, interested in these things that the average person doesn't know about. And, so it is a little bit of a disconnect. And obviously the media and the people who are in charge are thought leaders to a certain extent, but at the end of the day, you really need to relate to people. And I find that there's a lot of conversation, but for things to actually happen, it takes so long. Like there are so many companies that are huge, and even just like thinking of a corporate company, like a corporate structure, like they can't, it doesn't just happen lightning overnight. So I don't know, somewhere in there, but Miriam, you probably have more to say from a designer's perspective.
I agree with everything you just said, absolutely everything.
Okay.
On the same page here. I wonder, in your opinions, what role do you think designers or fashion journalists play in sort of representing more than just the clothing they produce? So if it's about, social causes or advocacy in any kind of way, where does fashion fit into all of that? What statement can it make beyond just, this is my wedding day?
Everything you need to know about a person, this is where material culture comes in, you can tell just by how they dress.
Which is so sad if you've seen me out in the world recently, because I really am not projecting myself. But, I think everything you can tell about a person, but like 2020 is like a caveat in there.
But that also something. It means you're confident enough to go out there and not give a flying fuck about what anybody thinks about what you're wearing.
I don't know. Maybe.
Everything says
possible.
Something. And I mean, you're not one outfit. You're like a culmination of all the different outfits that you wear.
So then where does judgment come in, I guess? Because if I see you one day on the street, I'll I think what you're saying is I can make a judgment about who you are based on what you're wearing. But if it's a culmination of not just what you wear on one day, like how does the viewership aspect of fashion play into this? How does what people see of you make a difference?
I don't quite know how to answer that.
Yeah, I neither do I.
I think, go ahead.
I was going to say, I mean, fashion magazines will tell you to put your best foot forward every time you go out. But I mean, I don't do that. So I can't really speak to it. I can be a total slob.
Yeah, definitely. I think, I guess in a certain way, like that's where social media comes in, because you can reflect, if you care, you can reflect all elements of your personality and put out some sort of, whether it's conscious or not, I think people are putting out an image of themselves. And I guess that's where social media comes in. But at the same time, it's kind of a flat presentation of yourself, because there's a lot of things about you that don't happen on Instagram. But I guess from a style perspective, maybe that's where I'm putting out like the energy as to what my wardrobe means.
And do you think that there's some responsibility that a consumer or anyone who's just wearing anything has in, choosing what to wear?
I mean, I think in terms of like a style or in terms of greater ideals?
Well, both, right? Because I think what we wear, it's like the easiest way to judge a person is to say, well, like, oh, look what they're wearing.
Yeah.
Which clear, like, I actually don't think that you can necessarily always learn something true about them based on what they're wearing at all moments. But yeah, it's about style. It's about brands. It's about like, what does what you wear represent? What responsibility do you have to represent yourself through clothing? Miriam, it looks like you have.
I think a good example of this is, COVID times wearing N95 masks when it should be medical professionals who should be wearing them. I mean, I see somebody in one and I'm like, you're selfish. Why aren't you wearing a cloth mask? There are medical professionals who knew that mask more than you do. Another way I see it coming in is I think in the next 5 years, we're going to see women of wealth wearing a lot less of like the ostentatious branding because they're going to want to hide that wealth because we're going to be coming out of this giant recession and they're going to be resented for showing that they have wealth if they wear these logos all over the place.
That's interesting.
That might happen. I mean, I don't know. I'm going for like a Roaring 20s vibe. That's the only way I can get out of this is like thinking about some crazy stuff that's going to happen. So I'm like hoping that we are wild in
back
like
in our flapper dresses and
yes.
And I think you can do
but
that.
I do think you're right.
Without showing off the brand that you're wearing. Like I'm more like a Dior new look. Like there's a newfound love for dress up, but not in an ostentatious, Louis Vuitton, Gucci sort of way. That's what I'm hoping for.
It's possible. I mean, that's a Western lens. Like Asia is on another schedule. So they're, they're still in the first phase of ostentatious. So I don't think it'll change there. And and God love them because they're holding up the luxury industry right now.
So in terms of, I guess, our individual agency and what we can do now to better represent ourselves and the things that we care about, how do we do better when it comes to our fashion choices? What should we be keeping sort of front of mind?
I mean, from a sustainable perspective?
Yeah. Or even like an advocacy perspective. I think our clothing can stand for many things that we believe in beyond just what we're wearing. If it's a brand that you choose, if it's a cause that you believe in.
I mean, you raised the point in the intro, like, think about, stop for a second and think about the realities behind how this instant gratification and this fast fashion world, like, I think once you know a little bit more about it, and it's very easy to research this stuff. It's not like it's a niche topic anymore. It's like, it's everywhere. It's part of, international, policy, we're being worked into policy now. I mean, let's hope. But I think it's pretty easy to figure this stuff out or at least to be aware. And at that point, I think people do have an independent responsibility to, because, like we said before, like there's so much conversation about change and all the things that should be happening, from inclusivity to sustainability to whatever it is. There's so many things that could be happening, but at the end of the day, the choice that's made is by money. It's by people spending or not spending. It's consumer demand, right? Yeah. So that is where people have responsibility, and I do personally believe that people do have a responsibility. Like, there's just too much information out there to avoid it, like whereas 10 years ago maybe there wasn't. So in terms of specific steps, I can speak to that, but if we're talking just from the beginning, yeah, that's my thought.
Yeah, that's really something that I struggled with when I was trying to sort of find a focus for this episode, because all of a sudden I found, okay, well, fashion can mean this, but it can also mean that, and you can do this and that, and like where does the conversation even begin, right?
I mean, it's one of the biggest like pieces of the world that I think people don't realize. Like, I think when people say fashion, they think fashion, like the Devil Wears Prada or like something, or a Gucci bag. And it's like, it's not that. It's literally, you wake up in the morning, you're like wearing pajamas, like that's fashion, It's such a, forget what the number is, but it's like a multi-billion dollar industry. It's how, like, it's so huge. It's a huge part of everyone's life. It's just as big as food in your life or electricity or culture, you know?
Yeah. Unless we all move to a nudist colony, but I guess that won't happen again.
Yeah, true.
Well, thanks to the both of you for joining me here tonight. I'm wondering, just before we say goodnight, is there any sort of last message that you want to put out there to our young professional audience, whether it's about sustainable fashion or making responsible fashion choices, anything you want people to leave this conversation knowing or thinking about?
I mean, Miriam, do you want to go first?
You go ahead.
Okay. I mean, I would say, in terms of sustainability, like it is such a big topic, and I feel like it's this thing that people are like, oh, I don't know what to do. It's like scary or something, you know? And I think there are very small independent choices that you can make that are really like small, you know? It comes to, you know, buy one less thing from Zara or H&M a month or whatever it is. Like, make some small commitment to yourself that is, you know, attainable and won't, you know, I don't think it's realistic. You know, and this is something I even struggle with, like, even just being part of the industry. Like, I feel like I'm always raising this, and it's always just like, you know, it never really gets addressed that, you know, the answer to sustainability is always like, well, buy one dress. But that doesn't work because nobody wants to wear one dress for the rest of their life, you know? So there needs to be some sort of compromise. So if that small compromise can just be like, okay, this month I'm not buying anything from a big box store, it really helps. And especially I feel like within COVID, number one reason why that's important is because, and sorry, this is sort of slightly different, buying local and sustainable, they sort of are hand in hand in some ways. You know, buying local is so important because, you know, Amazon is going to be there tomorrow. That cash cow is like sickening. But the small store on Queen Street that that locally, that is a local business, is not going to be there if you don't buy one thing from them. So I think it really, especially coming into holiday season when people are potentially purchasing things, and I think that is when you really have your own ability to make those choices. And I think it just takes a little bit of like work. And I think if you have a tiny little small step program for yourself, like it's easy. And especially I think this year, like given COVID, I think a lot of people have gotten really better about their shipping policies and that stuff, so they don't make it such a pain in the ass. Because it used to just be like, Amazon is going to be here tomorrow, or if I order from this other place, like it's going to be annoying. But I think that people have really stepped up their game and made it like possible. So where possible, like please consider local, please consider just less from the Zaras of the world.
Right. And do the work.
Do the work. Zara's hard for me to avoid too, please.
Yeah,
value Village and Vintage, that's your best friend.
Yeah.
I was gonna say it's about buying less but buying better and making it last.
Yeah.
And then on top of that, bring in the vintage pieces.
Absolutely. This is my booby sweater.
Well, this is my blouse, but I named it after my booby.
Oh, amazing.
Wow. Amazing. So we had a question from the audience, just to share both of your Instagram or social media handles. If you want to do that here, that's great. And I can type them in the chat later as well.
Sure. I'm at Randi Bergman, RandiBergman, on Instagram and Twitter.
I should be Miriam Baker Designs, MIRIAMBAKER Designs.
Awesome. Well, thanks so much to the two of you. Thanks for our viewers for watching, and I look forward to staying updated with really how we can use fashion as an opportunity to stand up for the things that we believe in, and hopefully we can make this place a little bit more sustainable, one shirt at a time.
That is really what it is, one shirt at a time.
Right. Well, thanks so much. Have a great night, and we'll see you next week.
Thanks.
Thank you.
Bye.